listening to Scoot Closer.
Welcome to episode 3 of Scoot Closer. My name is Shweta, and in today's episode, we will be talking about a health issue that is increasingly common but often misunderstood, the dreaded urinary tract infection, or UTIs. We're going to cover the challenges with diagnosing UTIs and the myths that cloud how we treat them. And today's episode is extra special because we'll have not one but 2 interviews with experts.
I'm so excited. Today we're going to be talking to Amanda Burkardt, who is the CEO of Phiogen, a biotech company developing bacteriophage treatments to combat drug-resistant bacterial infections. After that, we will be bringing on Melissa Kramer, the founder of Live UTI Free, a patient advocacy organization that is taking charge on how researchers, practitioners, and patients can understand and deal with UTIs. These 2 women are changing the game when it comes to UTIs.
Yeah, Amanda and Melissa, they're certified badasses. They really got us fired up, both about UTIs in general, but advocacy broadly. So stay tuned for more there.
One of the things, as we'd been talking to Amanda sort of on background, she kept bringing up something which really stood out to me. When we think about how health issues can impact women, they impact them either differently, disproportionately, or only. There's a lot of research that's been coming out recently that the majority of people that are dealing with autoimmune diseases are actually women. So that would be disproportionately. When we talk about UTIs, that is something that disproportionately also impacts women. But the way that metabolic health and cardiovascular diseases and things start to show up, those impact genders differently. So I think that that was a really important distinction that Amanda had brought up when we had talked to her a few times. We're really starting to uncover therapies and research that take into account the intricacies of the female microbiome.
So UTIs disproportionately affect women, but let's just talk about how common they are.
The numbers, girl. She's
Gotta
here.
do the numbers. What we learned is that UTIs, there are an estimated 8 to 10 million people that are seeking medical care for UTIs annually in the US. And approximately 60% of women and 12% of men are going to experience at least one UTI during their lifetime. So really high proportion, not to be ignored, honestly, in both genders. If anyone's experiencing it.
But that number feels so low. I feel like 95% of women experience UTIs. Like, that's crazy.
I think so too. I mean, like, if we were to sample the women in our lives, I feel like that rate would be higher. But, one thing we dive into that Ankit and I both have experienced is that when you get a UTI, it's not usually one. You have recurrent UTIs, which are defined as 2 or more within 6 months or 3 or more within a year. And the stats tell us that about 25% to 30% of women are going to experience a recurrent UTI within 6 months of their previous infection. So it's a pretty high rate of people having recurring UTIs.
Yeah, as somebody who deals with UTIs, that is 100% return rate for me. I feel like, I feel like the minute I get
it's like
UTI,
those are not the returns I'm looking for, but okay.
The minute I get a UTI, the next 2 to 3 months are just like me making sure that I'm not getting it back. I finish my dosage of antibiotic, but now it's like I enter this like super hyper vigilant period where I have to make sure everything is like done exactly right, or this thing's coming raging right back. So yeah, all of those numbers, I'm 100% on all of them.
Yeah. If Ankita were the sample size, this would be a really alarming stat for sure. One of the things I was trying to understand, is why does it disproportionately affect women? I think that's important. There are more reasons, but I'll just list one of the top biological ones. It's partly due to our anatomy. So women tend to have a shorter urethra and it has a closer proximity to the anus. So that is one of the causes. There's different causes for UTIs, by the way. One can be E. coli related, but there are different sources that it comes from. But part of it is just this anatomical factor that sometimes causes the higher susceptibility in women with UTIs.
One thing that we learned that to me, again, felt like a really mind-blowing concept was that our urine is not sterile. And I feel like I have been lied to, because I feel like what they've told us always when growing up, or kind of colloquially what you hear is urine is sterile. And so now you have a UTI because some bacteria got in there and blah, blah, blah. But what they're finding out right now through research is that our bladder has its own microbiome. We know when we take antibiotics that there is disruption that happens to our gut bacteria. The same disruption is happening to the balance and the microbiome that exists in the bladder. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of other research or therapies that exist for UTIs. Antibiotics are the proven thing that'll cure you of it. But in the process, you are disrupting the microbiome, which then pushes you towards having recurring UTIs because you don't have all the good bacteria fighting the bad bacteria. And so, the bad bacteria is winning, and that's kind of like this cycle that you enter with recurrent UTI. So really, we're hoping with the conversations that we're having today that we can dive into what other research is out there that is maybe a little bit less disruptive towards the microbiome.
And obviously, Ankit and we're opinionated and passionate about this topic because we are no strangers to UTIs and recurring UTIs. So honestly, again, if we were the sample size, 100% of women get UTIs and have recurring
and
UTIs.
Recurring ones. Yeah. What is this 60-25?
Yeah. Who are the 40% of women that haven't, and can I shake your hand for not having it?
Seriously.
But okay, I think my first UTI was in college. And it was when we went to Florida and did the cruise Disney trip and all of that. I don't even
remember you were going through this.
It's weird.
Apologize.
I don't even think I told you, because I think I was really ashamed that I had a UTI. I just thought it meant that I was unclean and that I had done something wrong.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I don't remember the treatment process for my first UTI. So I can't remember antibiotics, or if we just got some cranberry pills, or if I just got over it naturally because I was 19 and so my body was able to bounce back or whatever. But I just know that was my first one, and I had a lot of shame around it. And since then, I've obviously dealt with UTIs, but I got stuck in this horrible cycle of recurring UTIs that was hell on earth for me. Ugh. And it was when I was in grad school years later, and I got hit with a UTI, and I hadn't ever had recurring UTIs before. So I was not aware that was the 9th circle of hell that existed. But
welcome to Dante's Inferno.
UTI edition. But I got a UTI. I'm in Mexico City. I speak Spanish, but not enough to talk to a doctor. It got bad enough that I took myself to urgent care, because usually you can just go to the doctor. I'm using Notes app, Google Translate, to just have a conversation with him about my symptoms and get treated. They give me a pretty aggressive set of antibiotics. I take those. As Ankita mentioned, antibiotics disrupt the good bacteria in your body. My good gut bacteria, while I'm living abroad and eating adventurous foods and just doing whatever, all of that stuff is now out of balance. For those 4 months that I was there, I had recurring UTIs for that entire time. I was on this terrible cycle where I would go back to the doctor and they'd put me on a stronger round of antibiotics. Gosh. And it got to the point where I was in so much debilitating pain, where I remember one morning I got ready for class and then it hit, and I curled up on the bed and I had to text my classmates and go, I have to miss class because I don't trust myself to make the commute. I think I just have to go to the hospital. And I did actually, at some point I had blood in my urine, but there was a good amount of time where that was just all I could mentally think about. I was just constantly thinking about when's my next bathroom break.
Dude, when you get a UTI, my brain stops working. I'm just bathroom. Bathroom. That's it. That's the only thing that's happening in your brain.
And kind of the only relief, this is going to sound weird, is sitting on a toilet.
And just sitting there.
And I did that one. So one time.
Drip peeing for 30, 40
Yes. Okay. I need to tell you. Okay. So on one of my weekends in Mexico, we go out to dinner, or we just order our food. We're having a great time. I go to the bathroom and suddenly the feeling is hit again.
Oh, no.
This is now my 4th recurring UTI. I come back to dinner and I look at them and I go, we have to go back to the hotel right now.
I need to curl up in a ball.
I was in so much pain. I couldn't sit through dinner. So we took the food back to the hotel and we're good friends. So I sat on the toilet, cracked the door open. They watched a movie on their laptop. And that was the rest of our night, was just us talking through the crack in the door, because I stayed on that toilet for at least an hour.
Oh my gosh.
Just like, I can't believe I'm saying that on a podcast, but nothing was even happening. It's just that was the only relief I could find. And then the next day I got, another
antibiotic.
Yes, I got another antibiotic.
Even more. Yeah.
And this is the frustrating part. Obviously, each of these times I explained to the next doctor and the next doctor, hey, I've been dealing with this for several months now, and nothing ever changed. There weren't deeper tests to be done. No advice was given to me of like, have you considered supplementing with these things?
Or
and
like
then
maybe
when I got back,
bacteria culture that would tell you which specific bacteria you have.
That never happened.
Exactly.
And then everything that was given to me was just longer and stronger antibiotics. And then when I was back in San Francisco, they just gave me like a very intense round. It like kind of magicked away after 6 to 8 months, to be totally honest.
Oh my God.
And I'm lucky that it did. But there was no nuanced treatment. And I'm not blaming the providers. It's more that like
nuance and women's health
they haven't met. No, they don't know each other. They're
they
strangers.
do not go hand in hand at all.
But that's the thing. I don't know how many of my providers had the tools or the research to help them treat me the way I needed to be treated. I live in fear. I think many people who've experienced it do, of experiencing UTI again, because once it hits you, you're screwed. You're just screwed.
So I think UTIs manifested in a really hard way for me as I entered my my pregnancy journeys, actually. So with my first pregnancy, we didn't know that I was going into preterm labor, and they thought that I just had a UTI. Yeah. And so they gave me antibiotics.
Yeah. Your pain was attributed to being UTI.
My UTI. Yes.
Rather than being preterm labor.
And so like the day that I am going into preterm labor, I'm calling my doctor and I'm like, man, I'm feeling a lot of pain. And she's like, yeah, you have a UTI. And I was like, I've had UTIs before. They haven't felt like this. And she's like, yeah, but you're 6 months pregnant with a UTI. Like, they feel differently. Wait till your antibiotics kick in. Give it another 12 hours. You'll feel a lot better. I went into preterm labor that day. That conversation maybe happened around, I don't know, 10 a.m. in the morning. I was at the hospital at 5 p.m. Like, this started off as a UTI, and I went into preterm labor. I had chorioamniocentesis after I gave birth, and all the things that happened. I had sepsis. So I had an infection of the womb, which then went into my bloodstream. And that's, I basically had sepsis. I got treated with a lot of antibiotics at the time to make sure that this was cleared. And to this day, I'm not really sure I understand how close of a call this was for me personally. But I remember very distinctly a doctor coming in the morning to my bedside, and he was looking at all of my charts. And he was one of the doctors that had treated me, but he wasn't my main doctor. And he was like, we have you on some big guns. Like, oof. Meaning we have you on some like big gun antibiotics. And again, like, that was just not something that was registering in my brain because of everything else that was going on. And essentially, I entered this cycle of when you take a lot of antibiotics, you end up getting yeast infections. Mm-hmm. So I entered this cycle of my good bacteria and my bad bacteria just like kind of being wiped completely, and then the yeast coming in and taking over. So I was dealing with yeast infections immediately, during this postpartum grief period. And that went into me having another recurrent UTI. So I take meds to get rid of my yeast infection. And then that somehow messes me up more. I get put on antibiotics for this recurrent UTI after all the antibiotics that I've already taken. And once I clear that dose, I can feel the yeast infection coming back in. And I remember I had a pill in my hand that would have like cured me of the yeast infection. And I was like, I can't enter this cycle again. I'm a crazy person at this time. All I can think about is how I want to get pregnant again because I've lost a baby and of course the next thing I want to do is go get pregnant again. I'm just in such a messed up headspace. And I remember I was doing a lot of research of like, what are some of the things that I can do at home? I came across some reading that says to treat a yeast infection at home, you can put yogurt on your vagina. So
scientific.
Instead of, I have this pill in my hand that could like help me with my yeast infection. And I was like, no, man, I'm going to go and do this yogurt situation. So.
This is, I mean, I know this, like, it's obviously like a very serious story, but all I was thinking about is like the Matrix where what's his face has to choose between like the red and blue pill. And you're like, do I take the pill or do I put yogurt on my vagina? And I mean, okay.
The yogurt on the vagina won.
But that is like such a sign of desperate times that you're like, no, I want off this roller coaster. I will do anything, even if it sounds crazy. And I'm gonna be honest, that's very on brand for you to be. It's very on brand for you to choose that option.
Shweta,
but I'm so glad it worked out.
I had entered this cycle, Shweta, and I just like I couldn't do it again. And
I can't believe you didn't tell me.
Dude, I don't know what was I even doing at that time? What was I talking to you about that time?
I feel like at that time, we talked about your health quite a bit. I had no inkling that you were doing such things with yogurt.
I don't think I knew what I was doing, honestly.
Was it Greek yogurt?
That's a great question. I wonder. I don't know.
Which brand?
Definitely no sugar. Please, if anybody's going to do that, do not get any flavor.
Actually, the strawberry Chobani works really well for me.
No.
For infections.
Cut that out of the podcast. Definitely nothing with sugar because you're just going to feed your yeast, so don't do that.
Oh my God.
But yeah, I mean, it's just like it's a roller coaster, and it's one that women are intimately familiar with, because they disproportionately affect us and because the therapies are, again, much broader versus being targeted, we end up in these really weird cycles. So now that we've listened to all the things you shouldn't do on the UTI roller coaster, let's talk to an expert in the field who is actually tackling bacterial infections in a more scientific and clinical way. Amanda Burkardt is up next.
Welcome, Amanda, to the pod. Welcome to Scoot Closer, and thanks for joining us today. For our listeners, Amanda is the CEO of Phiogen. Phiogen is a biotech company that is developing the next generation of bacteriophage-based treatments to combat drug-resistant bacterial infections, a large portion of which are UTIs. So, Amanda, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work at Phiogen.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. And I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about the incredible work that my team's doing to really solve this true unmet need in human health, but really something that disproportionately affects women. So my background is really based in deep science and have always been interested in and doing work in alternatives to antibiotics and really trying to develop products to address this what they call the silent pandemic, which is the superbugs or drug-resistant bacteria. So for context, every 11 seconds, an American is diagnosed with a drug-resistant infection. There was a big report that came out that attributed over 1.3 million deaths to drug-resistant bacterial infections. That is only projected to get worse by 2050, where they're estimating 39 million deaths globally will be attributed to some type of drug resistance. So it's a huge problem, expected to outnumber deaths caused by cancer, and it really is only getting worse as there are less and less antibiotics that are being developed and as antibiotics are losing their efficacy. So big problem. And throughout my career, I've really focused on trying to live in the space of innovation. How do we develop products that can help humans and animals in really these dire areas like drug resistance? So, Baylor College of Medicine had a researcher that was treating patients under emergency use authorization with these drug resistant infections. So, as it relates to UTIs, which is the number one request that they got, you can imagine, 20-year recurrent UTI. 7-year recurrent UTI, 3-year recurrent UTI. These patients are desperate, clinicians were desperate to find alternatives because the antibiotics stopped working, and these people were on PICC line antibiotics, just miserable. I mean, if you can imagine living with an active UTI for 20 years, just absolutely debilitating. And so the college said, hey, what a unique opportunity. We actually have patient data for a potential spinoff company. Could you take a look and see if there's an actual product market fit? And that's actually how Phiogen was born. And I personally struggled with recurrent urinary tract infections in my past, so I was really passionate about this. We launched in June of 2023, and now we're raising a Series A to take our product to a clinical trial to help people suffering from these basically undruggable infections. But our lead indication is for recurrent urinary tract infections.
Those are some incredible stats that you've thrown our way. I mean, 39 million deaths. I feel like antibiotics are just becoming rarer and rarer these days. And so the work that Phiogen is doing and that your team is doing seems so important in this space in general. We'd love for you to dive into the women's health space. It's incredibly broad. And as we have seen most recently, it keeps getting marginalized over time. How would you break down the different types of issues in this space?
Without getting too political, women's health is absolutely under attack right now, as is science. And it it's a shame because I do feel like there was a lot of momentum that was being focused around women's health, and there's been a lot of discussion too on what is the right term, because there really is no such thing as women's health. It is human health. We don't call it men's health, right? It's human health. But women weren't even required to be in clinical trials until the 90s. It's probably taboo for me saying this, but like there are still huge health inequities that exist and will continue to exist. And as long as research dollars are not going directly to women's health, it will remain. And for me, I have a call to the large pharmas to really step up and start supporting these biotechs and innovators because women's health should be part of their portfolio. And there's really 3 different categories when it comes to women's health. Women's health consists of diseases or, health problems that either differently, disproportionately, or directly affect women. And so we really fall in the disproportionate realm. Men absolutely get UTIs, but women are 30 times more likely to be affected. And postmenopausal women are even more likely to get affected. And there's a lot of different reasons why. It has to do with anatomy, but also hormones. I hope all of those who are trailblazing in women's health continue to do so. But I also hope that there are others that step up to the plate to continue to support it, especially now that the government funding is being slashed and women aren't going anywhere. And 100% of the next generation is going to be born by women.
Definitely want to keep up that hope and energy. Amanda, do you have observations from talking to investors and trying to seek funding about the trends of how different women's health issues are being invested in? So who is the money coming from and where is it going?
At one point in time, I was attending a conference and they said 87% of most VC dollars that are spent on women's health have to do around fertility, either getting women pregnant or preventing them from getting pregnant. And I do feel like for us, many of the VCs that we have talked to, that is really what they're focused on is fertility. And, I think it has been made evident and clear with this administration, fertility is top of mind as well. But it's going to take more than $5,000 to incentivize women. There's a whole infrastructure that is missing to support that as well.
I
if
need to
they,
send them my daycare bill, honestly.
right,
I don't
right.
know what they think $5,000 is doing, but
They
it's
got
not
some
covering my
Ford.
daycare.
That's right. I don't know what 5,000 covers. Not much. And
No.
so,
Maybe a
uh,
carton of eggs now? I don't know.
right? That's exactly right. So, but I will say, like, fertility has a huge target for funding. For us, it's also difficult because although our product is made for everyone to take, it really is women that are disproportionately affected. So we fit in a weird space because we actually are not your traditional women's health product or company. In fact, I've got a lot of pushback from the investor landscape, but even from the women's health landscape, that the investors that normally play in women's health, we don't really fit their landscape because of us not really affecting fertility.
Unfortunately, money talks, and that's just where we're at with it. But,
Right.
kind of following that line and saying that UTIs are human health. If you pee, you can get a UTI.
That's right.
Um, Tell us a little bit more about what you guys have learned about UTIs as part of your research. What have you learned about these
Mhm.
drug-resistant infections that you're coming across?
One of the really just baseline facts, about 90% of all UTIs are caused by one bug, and that's E. coli. And there are different types of E. coli. But normally, the E. coli that's causing UTIs is what I like to call self inoculation. So it's usually an E. coli that's either coming from your own microbiome or your own GI tract or your partner's GI tract or microbiome. So this is the problem with these recurrent infections. If it's not getting cleared with an antibiotic, there is a possibility that you are just infecting yourself because this is a otherwise normal bacteria that lives in your GI tract, helping to digest your food. But of course, when it gets outside your GI tract, say like in your urethra, for example, then it can cause infection. And in the United States, urinary tract infections are one of the most common bacterial infections. They're one of the number one reasons for urgent care visits, and they have the highest antibiotic prescription. They don't actually know if the antibiotic that they're giving you will work, which is a terrible way to use antibiotics. But for the vast majority of people, the UTI will go away. But for the 40% that it doesn't, then you start driving resistance and then you start really creating a problem. From a science standpoint, it's great for us to develop a product because there's really only one bug that we're targeting. We're hoping to create a product that can target multiple bugs, but E. coli is the main bug. And unfortunately, E. coli is the master of mutation. So E. coli can very quickly evolve and has evolved to be extremely drug resistant. And that's why we have such a problem right now and why there's such a need for alternative solutions because it's the more we use these antibiotics, the less effective that they can be.
I've lived this so many times, I cannot even tell you. I think Shweta and I are both prone to recurrent UTIs. And when I enter that cycle, when I get my one, I'm like, oh my God, here go the next like 3 to 4 months because
Right.
it's going to keep coming back. And I also use a lot of the supplements, cranberry
Mhm.
pills. Demonos is something that is actively always in my pantry because I like to see if I can treat it that way
Sure.
versus going to antibiotics because then it ruins my gut biome
True.
instantly. It just sends me on a spiral for 3 months. We didn't know that this, like a bacteriophage existed or could exist for something like this. So it just feels like a really important topic of conversation. I
Mhm.
wanted to ask, how is your drug administered? Is it IV? Is it a pill? Just curious a little bit about the logistics of it.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're investigating right now, different routes of administration. At the moment, the way that we are administering our bacteriophage product is through IV. And then also, we are experimenting IV plus catheterization, trying to figure out what the best combination of administration is for immediate treatment, but also long-term prevention. And that's really part of our value proposition is building a product that is dual action, that treats and prevents. And
I know, like Ankita said, 100% of the people on this call have had recurring UTIs. And so there's nothing more demoralizing, I think, in a clinical setting to just be given another bottle of antibiotics when you've dealt with this and you just
right.
know okay, well, I guess I have to go destroy my system because this is the only thing that's offered to me.
Right.
So it's a relief and really exciting to see that there's such a targeted solution to this problem that's so pervasive. We'd love to know more about what call to action you have for the listeners, the investors, the founders out there, or even patients, because I'm sure many of the people listening are nodding their heads having experienced UTIs once or multiple times.
If there are any large pharma people who are listening, I would say women's health is human health. And there's a huge business case for women's health. It's half the population. And there are still diseases that we do not fully understand, autoimmune diseases, cardiac diseases. We know they present differently in women. And we know that, I think it's some crazy number, 70, 80% of all autoimmune diseases are in women. So there's a lot left to be done. So even if UTI isn't your flavor, there's a lot left. There's so much kind of blue sky that I feel like is waiting to be tapped into for women's health. Please make it part of your strategic mission to incorporate women's health into your portfolio. That would be my call to large pharma. For investors, I would definitely say kind of the same thing. Like, there's so much business opportunity for investors in women's health.
We talked about this on a previous pod. There is $360 billion of missed opportunity in the women's health space, and that's what we're trying to get across. There is still innovation to be had.
Yeah, I don't know exactly that figure, but at least $2 billion of the US economic impact is estimated for urinary tract infections. And that's just one disease indication. So for investors, like, I agree, like, if you want an ROI and, if you watch Shark Tank, like, Mr. Wonderful will tell you, the companies that have the best returns are led by women. So I would also say, like, investors need to be investing in women-led companies as well. And then for women, I mean, the whole vaginal microbiome is untapped, right? You want to talk about fertility? There are strains of bacteria that cause miscarriages. There are strains of bacteria that predispose you to bacterial vaginosis. There's so much to be done just in the vaginal microbiome if it wasn't so taboo. So huge opportunities. And I hope investors see that. I hope large pharma sees that. I hope it continues to progress forward.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say is, if there is anyone listening to this who would like more information about what we're doing, we are fundraising right now. So if there's anyone who has money that's interested in supporting us or learning more about what we're doing, they can feel free to reach out to me just through my email, amanda@phiogenpharma.com. Also, when we do get this next round of funding closed, we will be recruiting for our clinical trial. So if there is anyone listening who is suffering from recurrent UTIs, who's desperate for a solution, I can't guarantee we're the answer, but I can guarantee you we are putting together a clinical trial where we're trying to help the people suffering from these untreatable infections.
Amanda, it's always so inspiring to talk to you because it just gives me hope and it makes me feel like we have a path forward. So this conversation is
very
really
fired up.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, who do I need to tell about this? Like, we need to start talking about the microbiome.
Yeah, exactly.
We're really excited to see where Phiogen goes next, and we'll be following along with your progress.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for teaching us and for
Sure.
speaking to our listeners.
Happy to be on, and thanks for the work you're doing. It's we need to be talking more about these things, so thanks for your advocating.
Is this what it feels like to follow someone into battle? It makes me genuinely hopeful that people like Amanda are leading innovation in women's health. She's so deeply knowledgeable and she's incredibly inspiring. Her clarity on the problems that we face is extremely sharp and acute.
I agree. I loved the way that Amanda broke down the problem space, and she really showed us what future therapies can exist for UTIs beyond antibiotics. So I feel super hopeful about that. Next up, we're going to speak to Melissa Kramer, who has built a vast organization that helps patients deal with recurrent UTIs by arming them and their clinicians with resources in real time. So stay tuned for more.
Welcome, Melissa, to Scoot Closer. Melissa is the founder of Live UTI Free, a patient advocacy group with an extensive network of researchers, clinicians, and organizations that provide critical information to people experiencing recurring UTIs. We're so excited to have you here. We'd love for you to give us a brief intro on why and how you started Live UTI Free.
Well, first, thanks so much for having me. It's always great to have an opportunity to chat about this. The whole idea behind Live UTI Free came from my own experience with chronic UTI, where I had recurrent UTI for a few years. So for about a 5-year period, I was really suffering from symptoms. I couldn't find information that really helped me move forward. Eventually, I did find a way forward, but during that process, I became so frustrated that I wanted to start an organization that brought together all the information for other women in similar situations so that they didn't have to go through all the fragmentation that I did just to find a way forward. And I've been doing this now for 8 years.
That's exciting. We're kind of following in your footsteps. We've had similar health journeys here ourselves and just felt confused and had to do a lot of advocacy and research ourselves. So we are about 7 years behind you at this point. But, we're also trying to do a similar thing here at Scoot Closer.
Yeah, there's so much work to be done.
Melissa, how many years was it that you were dealing with the UTIs before you were like, okay, this is enough, I need to take it into my own hands?
I think the first couple of years, I just kept thinking, okay, it's probably just this one UTI. I'll take the antibiotics. I felt better. It must just be unlucky that it came back. And then a few months later, it would happen again. And I'd think, okay, this is a bit weird from every clinician I see. And I started to travel full time, and I was seeing clinicians in many different countries. And they were all telling me the same thing, that it's something I'm just prone to. I don't really know what to do next for my treatment. And my question was always, why was I fine until this started? And now it's something I'm prone to, and I wasn't prone to it before. And I started to just think, this is not good enough. I'm going to have to take it into my own hands. So I started doing a lot of research and trying many, many different things. It took probably 3 years of just trying things, seeing multiple doctors before I felt like I'd started to heal.
I've heard that a lot as well with my recurrent UTIs. Is like, it's something you're prone to. It's like, it could be your physiology. And what was your sort of takeaway from it with like recurrent UTIs? Is it physiological? Are we actually prone to it, or do we just not have the right tools in place to treat these UTIs?
I think it's definitely the latter. So women are more likely to get UTIs than men, but that doesn't mean that we should be healthy 1 minute and then have UTIs for the rest of our lives. And so for me, I ended up approaching it from a whole body perspective. I was taking antibiotics every couple of months, and that was really affecting my gut health. And so I ended up with a candida overgrowth, and I was testing like positive in my stool and in my vagina, always for yeast. So I just started to approach it like I had a yeast problem as well as a UTI. And over the course of 2 years approaching it that way, I started to feel better and better until my symptoms disappeared. So I think that root cause problem is different for everybody, and there can be underlying conditions, it can be stress, it can be other health problems. Maybe you did just get a very antibiotic resistant organism. But if no one's helping you try to figure out why that happened and why it's continuing, then you feel quite alone. And that's one of the reasons I started this organization, is to help people feel less alone and feel like they have next steps to take.
So this is a really interesting takeaway that, you had to have the right provider help you troubleshoot this. And even then, it wasn't like one answer that will now apply to all of the different patients. Just at a higher level, can you tell us more about what are those gaps today in the way that we go about diagnosing UTIs or even treating them?
There's quite a few problems. One of the main problems is that the standard urine culture it's not really fit for purpose. It was designed on a premise that has since been disproven, and it's up to 50% inaccurate, which means up to 1 in 2 diagnosis is incorrect, because it was really designed to detect E. coli. But if your UTI is caused by something else, it won't detect it. And then there's also a problem with dipsticks. They're really designed to pick up when organisms produce nitrites, and not all organisms produce nitrites. So you might not even get as far as culture. You might immediately be dismissed because of a negative dipstick. And so people are just being told at all stages of this, you don't have an infection, and therefore it must be all in your head, or I can't help you. But it doesn't make any sense from the patient perspective, because you do have these symptoms. Even if the test is negative, there is something going on with you, and you have symptoms that need to be addressed. The biggest search term that brings people to our site is UTI test is negative despite my symptoms. And that's kind of an indicator of the biggest part of the problem, that people are not getting answers with testing, and their doctors do not know what to do about that.
We keep hearing about this, like it's all in your head when it comes to women's issues constantly. Like this has become such a recurrent theme as we're talking to people in the community.
It's even though I've heard this so many times over the last 8 years, the specific things that people are told in their appointments. Have you tried drinking wine? Have you tried yoga?
Oh my God.
Have you tried not thinking about your bladder? How does your husband feel about this? It's never, how can I make you feel more comfortable? How can we improve your quality of life? It's, have you considered that you're the problem? And I've not ceased to be frustrated every time I hear a story like that.
I can't believe that that's still being said these days. Like I hear stories of people from, older generations hearing that in the 80s, 90s, but like maybe I'd love it if a doctor prescribed wine to me, but not really. Like what?
Especially since a lot of people find wine exacerbates their bladder symptoms. So the whole thing is just ridiculous.
Have you considered making it worse for yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Melissa, maybe I'm asking an obvious question here, but why is it an acceptable standard of care for that urine culture test? Is it the urine culture test that you said is like 50% accurate? Why is like, what in the medical system are you observing as like preventing people from wanting a more accurate test?
It's not that they don't want a more accurate test, but this test was developed in the 1950s and it was quickly accepted as the gold standard to detect UTI, even though that's not what it was designed for in the first place. But there hasn't been anything else, and it's really only been since 2012 when researchers discovered that the urinary tract has a microbiome that kind of disproved the premise that the culture was built on, which is that the bladder is sterile. And so as soon as we knew that it wasn't sterile, we knew that everything we'd done before that was incorrect. If we understand there's a microbiome, how do we know that what we're seeing is causing the problem or is not supposed to be there as opposed to part of our healthy microbiome? So we've just opened a can of worms basically, and for the last 13 years researchers have been trying to fill these little gaps, and in the meantime we're still using this gold standard test because nothing else has been proven to be the answer.
In like when I first started learning about what urine is or had consciousness of it, I think I knew two things about it. One, that it's sterile, and two, that you need to drink more water and make sure that it's as clear as possible. So the fact that we're now learning that, our bladder has a microbiome, it's kind of brand new information for us, honestly. And it's been one of the things that's been like mind blowing for us. So can you maybe share a little bit more about the recent research and just how you've come to, this urine having a microbiome finding?
So I think a lot of people are familiar with the Human Microbiome Project, which started in 2007, and that started to look at the different places on the body and what composed the microbiome. So we looked at the mouth, the gut, the vagina, the nasal cavity, and the skin, and the urinary tract was not included in that. So that kind of left a space because we just assumed it was sterile. But the more you think about it, the less likely it seems that anything in the human body could be sterile. So the fact that it took us this long is mind-blowing to me. But researchers also came to that same conclusion: it cannot be sterile. And we have been working with one of those researchers, Alan Wolf, to run a project called the Bladder Biome Project, where we're trying to fill in those gaps that we didn't get with the Human Microbiome Project. So we're looking at the urine of healthy controls, so people who never experience UTIs or very rarely. And we have a group that experiences recurrent or chronic UTI, and they're collecting a urine sample every day for 40 consecutive days. And that way we can look at the changes in their microbiome over time. And so we've actually finished data collection just this year. Now we're analyzing everything, and it is a lot. But I think that it will start to help us fill some of those gaps and hopefully then help us develop better diagnostics and better treatment methods. There's just so many gaps in this space that we want to connect people with our data and the patient community as much as we can and try to move forward incrementally until finally patient outcomes are improved.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to ask, you earlier said something that sparked my interest. Are the male and female microbiomes different?
They are quite different. So on the whole, the urinary microbiome in both males and females is a lot less dense than the gut microbiome. The female urinary microbiome is generally lactobacillus dominant, while the male urinary microbiome is streptococcus dominant, which makes them quite different. And that also raises then the question of how these might interact during sexual activity. And that is not usually a problem, but for some, sexual partners, it might be. And that's another area of research that we're hoping to see more work in.
We're so excited to be living in this age to maybe think that recurrent UTIs could be handled at a root cause versus symptomatically. So are there other areas of research in the UTI space that you are excited about that, you know, patients should be aware of, not just with your organization, but other organizations as well?
I would say in the last 8 years, we've seen a lot more research happening in this space. So we have a new antibiotic that was approved by the FDA this year, the first one in 20 years or more. There's a few UTI vaccines that are in the drug pipeline right now. There's a Urimmune vaccine already accessible in Spain and in other parts of Europe, and also some other countries. It's quite difficult because it's still kind of in clinical trials. So slowly we're seeing that there will be more options for patients, and all of that is very exciting, especially if we can finally understand the underlying mechanisms for all of this.
Can you talk a little bit more about the vaccines? Just what is the mechanism for that, and why do we think the vaccines could help with UTIs?
The vaccines are all slightly different, but they're generally working on a handful of organisms. So they'll target a couple of organisms that are known to cause UTIs. So the Urimmune vaccine is a sublingual spray. So you spray it under your tongue, and it's supposed to help your immune system identify those organisms and then fight them. But there are a few vaccines that are in development that work in different ways. So they more just make the immune system in general fight infection and more specific to the bladder. So they might be delivered via a catheter directly into the bladder. So they all have slightly different mechanisms, but we're hearing pretty promising reports. So there was a 9-year study just published for Urimmune, and they showed that the majority, or over half of the people, had a reduction or a complete absence of UTIs in that 9-year follow-up period. And a lot of people kind of feel like that's not enough, like half of the people. But for that half of the people, that's huge. If that
yes.
like kind of thing can work, it's non-invasive and it's very safe. Someone who's experiencing 10 to 15 UTIs a year, even if they have 3, that's a big improvement. So we should never dismiss something because it's not going to help everybody 100%, because everybody's underlying cause is different too. So we have to think about a multi-pronged approach to treatment for UTIs.
Yeah, what a brand new concept that we have to have targeted therapies for, you know, people versus just broad spectrum therapies that we're kind of doling out. What a novel concept. You have this amazing informational packet on your website. Can you talk a little bit about that? We think it's an amazing resource, you know, for listeners.
Yeah, sure. So some of the things that patients say to us, first, it's really hard to find a clinician. So we've developed a network of a few hundred clinicians who specifically work in this space and have been recommended by other patients in the community. But you can't always access one of those. So patients asked us if there was something that they could take to their doctor and something they could prepare for their appointment with. So we created a white paper with some of the clinicians and researchers that we work with that is in clinical language and talks about the problems with testing, so patients can forward that to their doctor. But from the patient side, we made a worksheet that helps people consider what their goals for their appointments are and what they would like to talk to their doctor about, so that they can then go to their appointments feeling more confident about what they want to cover. And hopefully your clinician will be open to listening to any information that you bring with you about new treatments or new testing. Because I think patients are a really valuable resource for clinicians. They have time to do the research. That doesn't make them annoying. That makes them great. Now you can listen to what they're saying and do your own research about those specific things and help them make decisions. And that is the optimal appointment, if a clinician gets on board and helps you in that way.
And the crowd goes wild. I mean, that is exactly right. So you can find that worksheet and that packet on liveutifree.com. It's available to anybody. And, you know, if you're somebody who deals with recurrent UTIs, you should start there.
Yeah, I think one of the main points that we just keep coming up against, no matter what health issue Ankita and I are researching, is just it ends with you having to do your own homework. And showing it to your providers and being a really active participant in your healthcare, which I think many of us have been conditioned not to, because we're supposed to hand over the reins to the experts and just kind of take the instructions as they come. But I think your organization and the work that you're highlighting with the patient tools is just such a great example of doing our homework on our own bodies and making sure that we protect ourselves with the treatments that we're getting. Our listeners, they're mostly like us. We're all just people that don't necessarily have medical field experience, but are dealing with our own personal issues. But we also have a variety of listeners that might be in the research or clinical space. And so if you have, a call to action to our listeners, whether they are patients or providers or researchers, is there anything you'd like to tell them?
Yeah, I think I probably have something for all three. The thing with clinicians is that you should see patients who are knowledgeable and who have done the research as valuable, because they can help you help them find a way forward, which then takes you to the patient side, which is that you really do have to do your own research, and it shouldn't have to be that way. But in spaces like this, it really, really is important to research and to think about what you want to ask, and then to set goals for your appointment and then advocate for yourself. And then when it comes to researchers, I just encourage researchers to get patients involved from the very beginning when you're just thinking about what research to do, and keep them with you right through to the end, because that will really impact patient outcomes more than anything else.
Your perspective on this issue is so well-rounded because of the way that you set up your organization. So I'm just super appreciative that you're able to hit it from the clinical, the patient, the research side. And I think that gives us a really amazing 360 perspective. So thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for having me and for providing opportunities for us to all talk about these problems, because there really is so much going on and we need to be talking about it if we want to help everybody.
Not to be triggering, but this is the recurring part of our show, much like UTIs, where we close out with our call to action to our listeners, whoever you may be. Ankita's got some tips for you.
So I hope you followed along with the amazing conversations that we had with Amanda and Melissa. Melissa talked about liveutifree.com. Please go on there, check out the resources that her and her organization have put together. There is a patient guide that you can print out and take with you and workshop with your doctor. I'm laughing because it's just funny to workshop something with your doctor, but you can you can work on it with your doctor.
Improv. It's yes and. Can you imagine? Can you imagine going to the doctor's office and they're like, "You have a UTI," and you're like, "Yes,
and I have a patient guide." Yes, and you're going to run a culture. There's a patient guide on liveutifree.com, which is truly extensive and amazing. And if you're somebody who's dealing with them, please utilize them. There's also a guide that can help clinicians essentially work with their patients that are having recurring UTIs. The other call to action here is, if you're dealing with recurring UTIs, or even if it's a one-time thing, they can run a dip test. They can say, here's an antibiotic. You can go away with that. But you can also ask them to run a culture and see if there is a specific strand of bacteria that comes back that's predominant, and have a follow-up conversation with your doctor on what they would recommend. Would they recommend finishing out the antibiotics that you are on? Would they recommend that you start another round of antibiotics that's more specific? So, those are some other things that you can also do. As we were talking with Amanda and Melissa today, we learned also about a lot of new therapies, bacteriophages for treating recurrent UTIs. Melissa talked about new vaccines that could potentially come onto the market. So if you're listening to the podcast, you can find us on Instagram as well as LinkedIn at Scoot Closer. And we are going to continue to follow this because this is near and dear to our hearts and our vaginas. So stay connected with us, and we will continue to cover these topics and new advances. We will do our best to inform listeners as clinical trials for different advances from Phiogen or Live UTI Free are coming online. You can check out our brand new website, scootcloser.com, which links out to other useful resources in the women's health space.